Here we go. Okay, so last fall I had some apples that I didn't use, so I decided to freeze them for another use. And since I'm stuck in the house, I decided I was going to figure out something to do with the frozen apples. And since I am too lazy to make a pie, but not so lazy that I won't make cinnamon rolls, I've decided I'm going to try something new and make a apple cinnamon roll. So the apples, I defrosted them, and what happens is when you cut, you guys should know this, but when you peel and cut apples, they start to turn, they oxidize a little bit. So these were actually white before I froze them, but because I defrosted them and they've been sitting around, they've gotten a little bit brown, and that's the other reason why I want to use them up. Also, because they've defrosted, there's a lot of liquid in them, so I'm going to cook them so that I can cook out some of that liquid. So when I put them into the cinnamon rolls, they will not be too wet, okay? So what I'm gonna do first, they're gonna be really soft. I'm just going to cut them up a little bit, okay? And then I'm gonna saute them, and I'm gonna saute them in some brown sugar and some butter, try to make it a little caramelly, maybe a little spice. I don't want to add too much flavor to the apples because the cinnamon rolls themselves are going to have flavor. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to need all these apples, but let's see what we need. Okay, so I'm just going to give these a rough chop, right? This is not about having them perfectly sized because they're going to be inside of a cinnamon roll. So we're not going to see them. Besides, if I mess around with them too much, they're just going to fall apart because they are very loose. Okay. So these have been peeled and sliced and frozen. So this obviously is a multi-step process because I have to prep the apples, then I have to make the cinnamon buns. I'm going to save some of these apples, I think. Maybe I'll make some apple muffins too. Okay, so I have my apples. I'm going to heat up my pan. I want a pretty good temperature on the pan because I want the liquid to evaporate, okay? Now I also have to be careful because if my pan is too hot, the butter's gonna burn, okay? All right. So some of these apples are still a little frozen, so I also have to be careful that there's not going to be splatter, okay? I'm using a saute pan because a saute pan is wide, okay? There's a lot of surface area. Also, because it has sides that flare out, that's going to help with evaporation of the liquid, okay? I can already tell that my pan's starting to heat up a little bit, so I'm going to get the butter in. Okay, I'm not measuring anything because this is just for to cook the apples, okay? So I'm not, this isn't part of the recipe. This is just an addition to the cinnamon rolls. All right, so we put a little bit of butter in. Take our apples. We don't want a lot of the liquid, so I'm just gonna kind of pick them up. Okay, so the apples are cold, so they're obviously gonna bring down the temperature of the pan. Okay. That back. All right, So the main goal is to cook the liquid out, not so much to cook the apples because the apples are already soft. Okay. So the higher my heat, all right, the juice is gonna, the water and the juice are gonna boil and evaporate, and that's what we want. All right, I'm not gonna mess with these too much because you can see they're very soft and I don't want them to turn into applesauce, okay? A little pinch of salt, not too much. I'm gonna wait for the liquid to evaporate before I add any of the other ingredients. Okay, so you can see that's the liquid from the apples in addition to the butter. Okay. Now I have this pie spice. This has different types of cinnamon in it, vanilla sugar, mace, ginger, nutmeg, anise seed, and cloves. So this is going to add a lot of spice to it. So I'm not going to use a lot of this. I just want a little sprinkle. Okay, very little. I think we have this at school too. I don't know if you guys have used it yet for anything. Okay. All right. All right. It smells good. So, I'm gonna take a little bit of brown sugar. So the brown sugar is gonna melt. It's gonna add a little bit of flavor, and it's also gonna help tighten this up so it almost makes like a little bit of a caramel sauce. So what I'm watching for is I'm watching for some of the liquid to evaporate. I'm looking, you can see it's almost changing color, right? That's also because the brown sugar is in there. So I'm looking for it to, the viscosity to change, right? It's gonna go from a liquid, see it's very liquidy there, and it's going to start to thicken up, all right, and become a little bit more syrupy. Okay, I also don't wanna add too much brown sugar because part of your filling for your cinnamon rolls is sugar in with the cinnamon, right? That's your filling. So I don't want these to be too sweet, and I don't want these to be too gooey. Okay, so you can see how around the edges it's starting to thicken up a little bit. I've got my heat pretty high. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm about a notch or two below high. And as the liquid evaporates, see, the liquid's already starting to evaporate because I have my heat pretty high. I'm gonna lower my heat because I don't want it to burn. I don't want it to stick, right? But I still want some of that liquid to cook off. It smells good. Okay. So, you can see before when I pushed these away, there was a lot more liquid. Now there's not as much liquid. Okay. Now as these cool, the syrup's also, the sugar's gonna thicken up a little bit too as it cools. Okay. All right, looks good. So I'm going to shut it off. I'm not going to touch them. I'm going to let them cool in the pan for a little bit, because if I put them in a container right now, it's going to take longer for them to cool down. All right, so I'm going to use the surface area of the pan. All right, and then tomorrow I'm going to use this, or next day. We got to see how many days it's going to take to make these cinnamon rolls, but this is going to go in the filling. All right, so today we're going to work on the actual dough for the cinnamon rolls. It is an enriched dough or a sweet dough, which makes it different than a lean dough. And a lean dough is just flour, water, yeast, and salt. An enriched dough includes other ingredients like sweeteners. We're using sugar and dairy and other additional fats. We are using buttermilk and melted butter. Okay, so, and eggs. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 additional ingredients, which are going to make it an enriched or sweet dough. I'm using a mixer. I'm using it with the dough hook. Okay, that it's going to be a sticky dough. It's not going to be like a pizza dough or a pasta dough. It's not going to be super firm. The recipe says to use all but 1/4 cup, and then add this in at the end as needed to bring the dough together. So we'll leave that off to the side. The other thing that's important is I have fancy yeast because I'm fancy, okay? So this yeast, the one we have at school is the Red Label yeast. Same company, just different type of yeast. This Gold Label needs less water to activate, and it works well when you have enriched ingredients. So we are using the Gold Label yeast. That's going to help activate our carbon dioxide, so that because we're not using just straight water as our liquid. Okay, so what have I done so far? I have melted my butter. I didn't super melt it. It's a little thick. I was softened butter and I just softened it more because I didn't want to separate, because I have to mix in the buttermilk and the eggs, and I thought it would be a nicer emulsion if I just softened the butter. But as you can see, it's like 1 second from being completely liquid. The buttermilk I had to warm up because you need it to help activate the yeast, especially with all the fat. So I put it in the microwave and I'm taking its temperature. Okay, it is 106, okay, which is good because we don't want it above 110 because it's going to kill our yeast. So I am going to add my eggs first. I'm going to combine some of my ingredients to make it easier to mix it in, okay? Pizza dough, remember, was really easy because you just had the water. These ingredients are going to make it a little bit more difficult. All right, I'm going to break up those yolks. All right, you also don't want your buttermilk too hot because then it's going to cook your eggs, okay? All right, good. So those are my eggs, my buttermilk, and my butter, okay? Now this is also a little bit different than our recipe for the regular doughs that we've done, okay? Because this one, I'm just going to put my flour in. I'm going to put my sugar in, okay? Remember, I don't want the yeast and the salt to touch one another, okay? So I'm going to put the yeast in. Gonna whisk it, right? So that yeast is protected. Okay, then I can throw my salt on top. Okay. Gonna put my dough hook on. All right, very slowly while the mixer is on, I'm gonna add my liquids. Okay, I don't want to mix it too quickly. Okay. All right, let's let this go. See how it comes together. All right, so what we're looking for is I'll stand this way. What we're looking for is the dough to come together, okay? It's not gonna completely pick up like a regular lean dough, but what we're looking for is we're looking for it to come together, incorporate all the flour, and pull away from the sides. You can do this by hand, but it's really difficult because of the ingredients. Much easier by a mixer. I'm gonna help it along a little bit. Pull. Okay, and the gluten's not going to develop as much as it would in a lean dough because that fat, what it does, if you remember when I've talked about the fat surrounds the gluten strands, so it stops them from becoming too strong, all right? Because you don't want a tough cinnamon roll, you want a tender cinnamon roll. All right, so if you see, I'm starting to have two doughs. There's like a drier outer dough and then the more incorporated inner dough. Gonna help it along again. So you can see it's a very sticky dough. Okay. All right, looks good though. Okay, you want to let this go for a while because you really want it to be well incorporated. You really want that buttermilk and the eggs and the butter to really incorporate well into that dough. This is going to be your only opportunity for it to really, for any of the gluten to develop, so you want to let it work for a while. This is not This process takes a little bit longer, right? Same thing if you make a brioche dough or like a roll. Sometimes you make rolls that have milk and sugar in them, okay? Looks great though, look at that, beautiful. We definitely don't need that extra flour because you can see how the dough is coming together. It's not sticky. It's not even sticking to the bottom of the bowl. So we're definitely not going to add any more flour to this. Okay. Now, this is also going to take longer to rise because of all that fat. Okay. The sugar is going to help to boost the yeast. But because of that buttermilk and those eggs, the yolks and the eggs have the fat and the butter, this is going to take a while to proof up. So whereas a regular dough might take an hour, this could take 2 to 2.5 hours to double. So there are two options. You can put it somewhere. You could start this early and let it go for 2.5 hours. Or you could just put it in the refrigerator overnight. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave it out for a little bit. In order to roll this out, you have to refrigerate it because it's too sticky to roll out without letting that butter firm up a little bit and create a firmer dough. Looks good. Looks really good. Okay. Okay. Yeah, look at that. That's nice. Nice dough. Okay. So, because when you dirty it, you have to clean it. I'm going to use the same bowl to proof it. Okay. My oven has a proofing function, which means the oven itself only gets to about 80 degrees, okay? And then it shuts off. And then that way that is a nice warm environment for the yeast to develop, okay? All right, so always want to just give your dough a quick finish. Bring it all together, okay? You want to make a nice ball, tighten it up, okay? Put it back in the bowl, okay? We don't want it to dry out, okay? So I'll cover it, and I'm gonna let it sit for about an hour. So look at it now. And then we'll check it in an hour. Okay, so this is my dough. I'm gonna put my oven on the proof setting, okay? So that I can put it in the oven and let it rise in the oven. The other thing I wanted to show was the apples, okay? So I tasted them yesterday. They're not too sweet, which is good. And you can see there's not any liquid left in there, right? Just nice cooked apples. So that's all set for tomorrow for when I fill them, because I don't think I'm going to get to it tonight. Okay, but the other thing I want to do, remember mise en place and get ahead of the game, we can make our filling that goes inside the cinnamon roll before we roll it. So, not too many ingredients in that. Brown sugar, cinnamon, and it calls for clove, and clove to me can be a little bit intense. And since I used the pie spice filling in the apples a little bit, I'm gonna continue with the same flavor profile. Like I said yesterday, this has cinnamon, a little bit of vanilla sugar, mace, ginger, nutmeg, aniseed, and clove. So it's not just straight clove. This is Vietnamese cinnamon. Okay, Vietnamese cinnamon. There's cinnamon from many different regions, many different areas. This is amazing. Cinnamon, it's my favorite cinnamon to use in baking. It's got a higher oil content, so it's strong, but it's sweet. It's just got a really wonderful, fragrant, you can tell this is brand new, fragrant smell. It's just, literally, it's a sweeter smell. Oh, it's so yummy. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to take my brown sugar. So if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, you know you have your filling, okay? You want to pack your brown sugar, make sure it's level, okay? Put my brown sugar in. I'm mixing it up a little bit and putting apples in it. Like I said, I wanted to use up some of my apples, so I thought it would be cool. Okay. This is what's obviously going to give you your cinnamon flavor. Okay. Love this. Love it, love it, love it. Okay. So, I'm going to put in not too much of this. Oops, making a little bit of a mess. Okay. Wow, they really, puppies filled up. Okay. All right. And because I love cinnamon so much, I'm going to throw a little extra cinnamon in it. Okay. Because of the apples too. I want to make sure I have a nice, also a pinch of salt. Going to help enhance the flavor. Just a little bit. Okay. So just going to take my fork. Now I'm doing it in this little container. If I was doing it the same day I was using it, obviously I would do it in a mixing bowl. Okay. But I'm not going to be using this right away. Right. I don't want it to get all hard and gross. I want to try to get a little bit ahead of the game. Want to make sure it's well incorporated so that when I sprinkle this on my dough, I don't have clumps of flavor in one spot and not in the other. Beautiful. Okay. I like to smell things. Smells phenomenal. Okay. So I got to get one of my little airtight lids to put on this. Clamp this shut. So now I am gonna let my dough proof. I've got my filling ready, right? My apples and my spiced brown sugar, and then I'll be ready for assembly. Okay. So this is the dough after 1 hour. Okay, it's definitely gotten bigger. It's not yet doubled in size. So it looks good though. So I'm gonna put it back in the oven and let it proof for probably another hour. Here is the dough. It looks beautiful. It totally has doubled in size. I actually ended up putting it in the fridge last night because it was getting late. But it's beautiful. It rose really well. I'm going to use my bowl scraper to loosen it. Now, I don't want to add too much flour to this, okay? It's a beautiful dough and I don't want to ruin it, but I'm obviously going to need a little bit of flour as I roll it out so it doesn't stick, okay? Take it out. Get all the stuff that's left in the bowl. You know, my theory, that's another part of a roll that we don't want to give up. Okay. Every little bit counts. Okay. So, done with the bowl. So now I have my dough. It's very, you can see it's very firm. We've got nice fermentation. Those are the great bubbles that we're looking for. Okay, once again, I don't want a lot of flour. Okay. I'm gonna flip it over. Okay. Now, I want to start it in a rectangle because I want it to end up in a rectangle. Want to give yourself enough room. Want to make sure it's not sticking. Okay. Okay, so we want to start from the middle, work our way out, turn it. I'm using a French rolling pin. I like those a lot better. Okay. Now, every once in a while, I just want to pull my corners out a little bit so that it becomes more of a rectangle. Go diagonally so that I can get my corners. It's a very firm dough, okay? If you let it sit out, if it's too hard to roll out, you may need to let it sit out a little longer. I may have to because this seems to be a very, very stiff dough. Okay, so you see I'm trying to get my corners, trying not to lose the shape of the dough. I also want to check to make sure it's not sticking. Okay. Got a little bit of a hole. I'm gonna have to patch that up. Now, usually a recipe will tell you the dimensions that they want your dough to be. You also want to make sure that you are getting an even thickness, right? You don't want thicker spots and thinner spots because it's going to make your cinnamon rolls. So you don't want to go like this and just roll right off the edge, because what's going to happen is your edges are going to get thinner. It's a pretty sturdy dough, as you can tell. So I'm just going to flip it because I got short arms so that I can work with this corner. Need a lot of room to roll out dough. I will fix that hole, by the way. Not rushing, really looking at it. Okay. It's starting to stick a little, so I just want to okay. So you want to go diagonally because that's going to help bring out your corners. If you just keep going in the middle, you're going to make it go a little rounder. Now you want even rolls, so you want to make sure you're squared off as best you can. Right, because it's always those end rolls that get cheated a little bit. Okay. So you want to make sure that your dough is of even thickness, okay? This recipe says 16 by 12. My bench scraper has inches on it, so 12, a little bit bigger than 16, that's fine. And then 1, 2, good. All right, so I am where I need to be. Now, if it's stuck, you can use offset spatula, right? The one with the little crook in the neck, and just very carefully, you want to be careful though, you don't want to ruin this dough, a little at a time. Go around the edges. Okay. And as you roll it, you can loosen it more. Okay. So that should be pretty good. Okay. So we have, mine's a little different, remember, because I'm adding apples. We have the brown sugar and cinnamon that I made yesterday. Okay. I have butter. They say to melt it. I don't like to melt it. You know, I'm pretty hands-on, so I've just softened it. And then I have my apples too, which I'm going to add to it. Okay, so when you're making cinnamon rolls, you want to leave a good inch or so along the top so that you have something to adhere the rolls. And I always seem to forget to do that, so I'm just going to put a little indentation, a line, so I remember not to go past that point. You want to go all the way to the other edges, because don't forget, each part is a roll, so even the ends are a roll. Okay? So it's a lot less messy if you use melted butter. Okay. We all know, you guys know how messy I can get. Okay, so this may not be enough butter. I may need more butter. We'll see. I'm going to use the back of my bowl scraper to very gently spread it out. Yeah, I think I may need a little bit more butter. All right, so I needed more butter, so I softened a little bit more butter. Fine. Okay. It's all good. Remember, spread it out all the way to the edge. Nobody wants to get the bum roll at the sides. Okay, beautiful. Try to do it as evenly as possible. Okay, now the filling has been measured out, so go for it. All right, use it all. Make sure you are spreading it out evenly. If you have big chunks of brown sugar, break them up. Go all the way down to the bottom edge. Make sure you're covering that butter. Oh, it smells delicious. That Vietnamese cinnamon is so fragrant. Okay. So now see, I'm using my hand as a guide so I don't lose it on the counter. You want it to be as even as possible. See, when I get the molasses and the brown sugar can sometimes clump up, so you just want to make sure you don't have any rocks in it. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Okay, so if you're making regular cinnamon rolls, just pat it in. All right, make sure you're getting that filling. Okay, so regular cinnamon rolls, this is where you would start rolling, right? You're done. But no, not me. Let's try something different, okay? Okay, so now I'm just gonna spread on my apples. I want them also to be evenly distributed so that when we roll them up, we have apple chunks in every roll. Okay. All right, looks like I eyeballed a good amount of apples. Okay. I don't need the apples to cover the whole thing, right? The apples are just kind of like a little bite, a surprise. I guess if you really wanted to make them super fancy and add another texture, you could add some chopped nuts into it. Pecans would probably be really good, or walnuts. We're just gonna go for the apples and the fruit. Okay, so that's our cinnamon roll. Now we need to roll it. We want it to be a tight roll. We want to start at the bottom. We want to go evenly across. You want to tuck as you roll. Remember what I said, if it starts to stick, excuse me, my head right now. If it sticks, you can use the offset spatula to see. I'm trying to make sure I have enough on the ends too. Okay. So tight roll, all the way across, pushing in. Oh. Tight roll, beautiful. Okay. Now we've gotten to the edge. Wow, this is quite a hefty roll. Nice. Okay. Now we've gotten to the edge. Okay. The edge that we need to seal. I also want to make sure that my roll is not stuck to the counter. Okay. Now, what I like to do, just to make sure it sticks, a little bit of water. Sometimes the flour can dry out the dough a little bit. Okay. You just want to seal it up. Don't play with it too much. You don't want to ruin your beautiful roll. Okay. gorgeous. So these are the cinnamon rolls. I covered them and I let them rise for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. So now I'm going to preheat the oven to 350. You can see how they're nice and puffed up. They filled in the tray. So I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 and then I'm going to bake them. So they're out of the oven. Okay, you can see when you're baking cinnamon rolls, what you're looking for is not only the edges to get nice and brown, but you have to make sure that the intersections are also well baked, or else you're going to have doughy rolls in the middle. Okay, because obviously the outside firms up and bakes up faster than the middle. But nope, that feels good. It looks good. So I'm going to let them cool a little bit. And then because of the apples and the brown sugar, there's a little bit of juice on the bottom. So I'm gonna have to get these out of the pan, but it looks like they're not sticking, so that should be easy to get them out. And they look good.